is Victoria Virasingh, who is joining me from the United States of America, and she's a Democrat and candidate for Virginia's 8th Congressional District. We'll be talking about a host of issues in this edition of Addis Dialogue, and you stay with us. Victoria, thank you so much for joining me.
Of course. Thank you so much for inviting me to this discussion.
You're most welcome. You know what? I think we should start our discussion with a little introduction about yourself, for some of our audience that are not that familiar with you. How about that?
That sounds great. That sounds great.
All right.
So
okay, go ahead, please.
My name is Victoria Virasingh. I am the daughter of 2 immigrants that was born and raised in Virginia, in Northern Virginia. My mom is from Ecuador in South America. My father is Indian, born in Bangkok, Thailand, to Indian refugees.
Mm-hmm.
And like many immigrants, my parents came to America in hopes of finding a better life, in search of the American dream. I was born here under similar conditions where we were in a foreign land with a new language, having to navigate a completely new system. We struggled growing up, but we persevered. We had faith in God. We worked hard and came out on top. I was the first in my family to go study in the university. I went to Stanford on a full ride scholarship. I got a graduate degree in international relations, a bachelor's degree in economics and international relations. I started working in the Senate, and I also worked in the private industry at a technology company in Silicon Valley. And when I came back home to Northern Virginia, I also spent time working abroad in Europe. Mm-hmm. And when I came back home to Virginia, I got very involved in my community with volunteering, getting involved in local politics. Mm-hmm. And the decision to run for Congress was a decision based in knowing what it's like to have an immigrant experience, an experience that is shared by so many, not just here in Northern Virginia, but across the US. Yeah. As many of you who are watching and many of us know, the world has changed in a tremendous amount of ways. Exactly. And I believe it's important for our leadership to adapt to those changes. It's important for us to build the next generation of leadership. Obviously, as someone who has ties abroad, as the granddaughter of refugees, I understand deeply how American foreign policy impacts our families, our friends, and our loved ones abroad. I'm very concerned with what I see happening, not just here in the district, but abroad. And I know that for myself and for many of the people living here in Virginia, it matters. It's important, the foreign policy decisions that we take. So for that reason, I decided to jump in, and I believe that it's a long journey. It takes a lot of effort and many tries, and I'm really excited to have this conversation with you because I think it's so important for us to remain very close, to have a very good understanding of what's happening on the ground in our allied countries. And as someone who is hoping to be a leader, I want to maintain that relationship. I want to continue having these conversations so I can understand better what the issues are, so it makes me a more effective leader here in Northern Virginia.
Exactly. I think your story is one, that so many first-generation Americans can share, including Ethiopians, right? Can you tell me more about that?
Yes. So, I grew up in Northern Virginia, Virginia, DC, Maryland area. Has one of the largest Ethiopian Eritrean communities across the US. We have a large immigrant community as well. There are many of us, there are so many first generation Americans. And I think it's important because the experience is unique. You are growing up in a country that is foreign to your parents. You are adopting a new culture, and many of us have very strong familiar and cultural roots outside of the US. So the question becomes, how do you, as a first generation American, How do you celebrate the culture that you come from? How do you remain close to your homeland? And there's a lot of different ways that we can do this. One obviously by visiting, but I do think it's really important for first generation Americans to take a leadership role and a proactive role in promoting the issues that matter to our home countries and being involved not just politically but internationally. And we have a voice here. I mean, many of us have opportunities that are in this country that our parents never had. We grew up speaking English, that gives us a tremendous amount of advantage here in this country. And I think it's important for us to use that advantage to not only help the diaspora here living in America and Northern Virginia, but also help our community living abroad and be that voice, be that advocate. And I encourage other first generation Americans who are looking to get involved. I encourage you to get involved. I encourage you to understand the issues. And I
Yeah.
encourage you to remain close to the homeland and to make sure that we as a collective do everything we can to support our community, especially in Ethiopia and Eritrea, especially during this time right now, which I find very pivotal and crucial.
Mhm. Yes, absolutely. I've also learned that you have strong solidarity, with Ethiopians. So you were standing by Ethiopians, right? And thank you for that. Can I ask for some of your reasons for this? That you're
Definitely.
standing by Ethiopians. Yeah,
Yeah.
please go ahead.
And I
Okay.
think this is where, again, it's really important to have the right information. I
Mhm.
think our media landscape, especially in America, in the past decade has changed tremendously. It is very difficult, oftentimes, to find good, true information. And as someone who grew up here, I grew up surrounded by the Ethiopian Eritrean community. I mean, these were my friends, my neighbors, people that I shared so many experiences with growing up. So when I started getting involved in politics, it was very natural that I started having conversations. I mean, it wasn't something that I had to look for. It was there because I had grown up in it. And when I was really excited. I remember to see so much of the growth in Ethiopia, Eritrea, and in the past few decades, the economic growth, the social growth, and I was very disheartened, disappointed to see the conflict, and see the devastation for the Ethiopian people. I think the U.S. has my own studies. My background is in economics, international relations, Latin American studies. I have studied numerous ways in which many colonial countries, including the U.S., have interfered and have really damaged, I believe, and led to the political and economic instability of many countries. Coming from having roots in the third world, I hate
Yeah.
the name third world country because it makes it seem like we are less than, when truly, when I think about Ethiopia and Eritrea, I see leaders. I see leading nations, not only in the continent of Africa, but throughout the world. I see allyship. I see a country that has stood by the US countless times when it comes to working together to combat terrorism in Africa. And so I was greatly disappointed to see a few of the decisions made by the U.S. government, this administration, that I find really hurt the economic development of Ethiopia, that really hurt the Ethiopian people. A few of those decisions, taking Ethiopia out of AGOA, furthering economic restrictions, not listening to the people of Ethiopia and understanding what was really happening on the ground. This, I believe, comes from a distance. When you have a distance between leadership and the people for whom we are seeking to serve, I don't believe a lot of the decisions were intently malicious. I think the root was bad information and not having those relationships And what I have sought to do with my platform and with my voice in the political sphere is to change that perspective, is to deepen the relationship, is to rebuild trust. A lot of trust, by the way, that has been lost. And we see that in electoral politics with the diaspora that's living here. And by the way, I will say, as I spend a lot of time, on WhatsApp, I spend a lot of time working with a lot of international media and media that has connections abroad. It's strong. What happened, the diaspora, not just in the Ethiopian Eritrean community, but in many communities, retain such a strong relationship. So for American political elected officials to ignore that, I feel is irresponsible. And
Mhm.
I fully stand with the Ethiopian people. I fully stand alongside the Ethiopian government and will do what I can to promote the issues and promote good information and
Mhm.
learn alongside to understand, just like the issue that we're going to talk about, other ways that the US can support Ethiopia.
Wow, thank you for that. So, let's also talk about your future plans. How are you going to, reinforce your ties with Ethiopians residing in the US, Ethiopian
Yes.
expats?
Yes. Well, obviously, first of all, one of the issues that I've been actively talking about and campaigning on has been opposing HR 6600 and reinstating Ethiopia into AGWA.
Mhm.
Those to me seem like two first steps that we must do, but it can't stop there. I mean, it's not enough to be reactive. We have to be proactive. I
Mhm.
think we're going to talk about the Nile River and the dam, extremely important. I think, we need to remain very vigilant. I think we have to remain active. I would love to visit Ethiopia and continue having discussions.
Yeah.
There's an event coming up in a few weeks with the Ethiopian American PAC that I'll be joining. So this is important to have these conversations with organizations that have relationships with Ethiopia that can help give more information to me as someone who's in the political arena and continue building. I think that this is instrumental. Having conversations like the ones you and I are having, where we can exchange ideas and where you can help me understand better what the issues are, since you're on the ground and you're there. And therefore, when I
Exactly.
take this and I communicate with my communities, and by the way, having a base in the Indian and Latin community, I mean, there's a lot of support there. Let's build a coalition. Let's come together. Let's use a community. We can further strengthen the community here by building a wider coalition. And as the wider coalition you have, the more strength you have, and the more you're able to move forward.
Thank you, Victoria, for that explanation. Yeah. I also know that you worked in the US Senate. So I wanna hear your take on Ethiopia's and America's relationship as we speak. What is it like now?
So when I worked in the Senate, this was back in 2008, and that time 2009, 2010. It was a very different time. I don't even believe we. I know I was really excited to see the formation of the Ethiopian caucus in the U.S. Congress. It's a caucus and a group that I would love to join. So I do think that right now the relationship is strained, given the recent decisions and given what I see has been, active lobbying from a group of individuals who have a right to lobby and have their presence and have their desires known. But it's important for us to listen to all groups. And
Yeah.
unfortunately, the way that politics in America works is really there's a lot of money and lobbying involved in politics. And as I have watched, not just in the Ethiopian Atrian space, but many different groups lobby, it's become very apparent to me that the more money the group has, the more they're able to invest in lobbying. And that's how you're able to build the relationships with lawmakers. They're going to help you get things passed. It's one of the things that, we really campaigned on, was getting money out of politics, right? Leveling out the playing field, making sure that every voice is being represented and it's not tied to an economic interest. It's not tied to money.
Yeah.
Obviously, that's a longer goal. But I do feel, from what I have seen, I was recently on in Congress for an event held by the Ethiopian community with different lawmakers. And listen, there's I think the Republican Party has been really adaptive to listening. That's what I've seen, at the very least, when I've been at the conversation. More Democratic Congress people are coming to the table. I think that's very important. Look, this is
Yeah.
not a Democrat Republican issue. This
Mhm.
is this is an issue about supporting the Ethiopian people. It is an issue about fairness and justice, about restoring trust
Yeah.
in a very fragmented relationship. I think that the economic sanctions must be lifted. I think it's the first step to rebuilding trust. I think America has a lot to do to rebuild trust within the Ethiopian government. And that
Okay.
work, frankly, needs to start now. And that's a work that I am hoping to do. It's something that I've been trying to build, especially with the community here in Northern Virginia. So I think there's a lot of work to do, and I am excited, to be part of rebuilding that trust. But listening, I think we have to build those bridges, and we need to listen and make sure that what we are doing is not creating further instability, both politically and economically, in the region.
Yeah. Okay. Let me also ask you this question, Victoria. How do you think should Ethiopian and American relationship continue in the future? What are some of the ways that you see here?
Well, I see a tremendous potential. Ethiopia has always been our ally, and in many respects. So, how can we further strengthen that allyship? How can we create more opportunities for partnership? I think there's a lot of opportunity, especially within partnership in the economic trade space. I see a lot of opportunity when it comes to sharing foreign policy goals, especially when it comes to terrorism and the advancement of democracy. These are huge opportunities for us to continue. I think I would love to see, partnership when it comes to international cooperation, not especially, especially when it comes to business, and there's a thriving social and economic development. So I believe, they're reinstating Ethiopia into Agua is, it seems like, such an easy thing for us to do, and a no-brainer. Further creating deeper economic ties and deeper international cooperation is instrumental. I'd love to see us engage. I know there's a lot of international conferences. We have so many in Europe. I'd love to see more in Africa, on the continent of Africa. I'd love to see Ethiopia host these conversations and bringing all of us together as a leader in the African continent.
Absolutely. You know what, Victoria, we're having this interview as Ethiopia is preparing to do its third round filling of the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, which it is building on the Nile River, which we call the Abai River, of course. So I want to ask you this question. How do you feel about that?
So I think it is wonderful. I think that, this is, given the amount of strain the conflict has placed on Ethiopian people, this construction is a huge opportunity to really reinvigorate the economy. I mean, the Nile, obviously runs through many countries. Ethiopia is one of them. I think this will provide a tremendous amount of aid and infrastructure into the Ethiopian economy. I've been following the development. I have been very excited to see the potential that it brings to Ethiopia. And I am looking forward to seeing this just be the beginning of really infrastructure to support the Ethiopian economy and the Ethiopian people.
But some nations do not seem to be happy about it. In fact, they're trying to bind Ethiopia via what they call binding agreements, still referring to past agreements such as the 1959 and 1929 agreements. Do you sense this subtle sentiment of colonialism and neo-colonialist pushes, maybe patronizing attitude toward Ethiopia? What do you think about it?
I absolutely do feel that sentiment. I mean, these binding agreements are from the early 1900s. I mean, how are we using language? How are we using a structure from a time where the balance of powers were astronomically different? And this is, I can understand uh, the the desire for dialogue around this. I can completely understand that. But when this project is expected to generate over 5,000 megawatts of electricity, which would double the electricity output for the country, I mean, this would bring a tremendous amount of support to Ethiopian people. And this binding agreement feels really displaced. And I think, sure, is there a way to compromise here? Of course there's a way to create an agreement that works, but I believe that we are not there yet.
The other thing is, as you know, the EU and Egypt also recently came up with, this statement pushing the three nations to come to the binding agreement. Should the EU be involved in your views in such matters in the first place? What is your take on that?
Yes, I believe that this the discussion that's happening right now is between three different countries who share access to a very generative river. And obviously, if you've been in a family and you have siblings, everybody knows that there's going to be discussion around the sharing of this resource. I believe that this discussion is best held at the table with the stakeholders, and those are the three countries involved in this discussion. I can understand the desire from the EU to help mediate this conflict. Maybe there's going to come a time where outside mediation is necessary. I believe that it should start within the African nations, as you mentioned. I believe that's when you have the best discussion. I do believe that, like we talked about before, there is a sentiment of colonialism. There is a sentiment of nations who have historically held an immense amount of power, and their ability to regulate and their ability to determine the outcome of many agreements. But it's 2022. We are living in a different era. And in order for us to progress, I think it's important to, I mean, one of the fundamental policies that I learned about when I was studying is really to empower local stakeholders to make their own decisions.
Yeah.
I really fundamentally believe in the importance of that. And that's why I think it's our job, and I see my role is to listen, to be an ally, and to support where I can, to take, I say proactive initiative, but that's alongside our allies, not in front of, not coming in, but really taking that alongside our allyship. So what it means to be an ally, and I believe Europe and EU is an ally to Ethiopia, Eritrea, and as it is to many countries on the African continent, then its role is to support the effort, and really to allow the countries involved in the discussion to take ownership of that discussion and to find an agreement that I think is suitable for all parties.
Yeah. Egypt even includes the issues of the Nile in their constitution. They also called for uninterrupted flow of the Nile. They also claim to have these historical rights to the water. So can any riparian nation condone Ethiopia's rights, to utilizing its natural resources through such claims, in your views? What's your take on that?
It's a great question. So obviously there's a historic presence of country, Egypt having access to this tremendous resource. And look, I think Ethiopia, different countries, I think Ethiopia needed to build the infrastructure to be able to take advantage of a resource, like the Nile. When you look at the potential of what that has to offer to the people of Ethiopia, it's tremendous. I mean, doubling the output of electricity. I mean, think about what that means, right? I mean, that means increased access to internet. It means stability in the home. I mean, it means access to more productive working. I mean, it's furthering the social and economic development. If I am Egypt, I'm thinking about this. We want our neighbors to be economically thriving because it helps encourage the region. We want our neighboring countries not to be in conflict because that conflict hurts neighboring countries with the outflow of refugees and immigrants. So I think we have to think about this as really an investment. I think that there's the concerns of not wanting. I think we see this in the U.S. a lot, right? You feel like there's an infinite pie, and if
Yeah.
your piece is getting taken out, then you're losing. But really, I think this is a win-win. I mean, this is powerful. The ability to help grow the region. I mean, I think this could. There's so many potential for this. So listen, I think there's obviously, we have to come, to an agreement. I mean, that's, necessary just because, when the dam becomes fully operational, obviously we want this to be able to maximize its efficiency. And I think there's a way for, for all the parties to sit down at the table. But look, I would encourage. I think there is a natural tendency to think immediately, what is being taken away from me right now. But I don't think that's the right perspective to take. And I think understanding more concretely, what this is going, the amount of water and the amount of generation and the output
Yeah.
versus the input, I think
Mm.
really realizing that, Ethiopia is now building an infrastructure to be able to use a resource that runs through its land. I mean, this
Yeah.
is this is a huge advancement. And I think when you take that broader perspective and thinking about it as an investment in a region and not just in individual countries, because there's regional growth and a regional opportunity here, you'll see that everybody has something to win here.
Yeah, yeah. Recently, Tivernaj tweeted that a country which does not contribute, one drop of water to the Nile, that's Egypt, cannot demand 100% of the rights to decide how the waters should be used by all. What do you make out of that?
I loved the tweet. I saw it, and we talked about this shortly before, and I think there's a lot of I think the sentiment shared, in that is when I couldn't help but think of our history, of I think our very troubled history as nations that had so many resources in their land, but did not have that right to access. And I think that in an economy, in a shared global economy, there is an obligation and responsibility to share the resources provided, especially when those resources are available to a number of different countries. Look, I think there's a historical precedent here, which makes it so that you've had a system working for so long, and any change to that system can be seen as threatening. But again, this is why I come back to, instead of looking at it as something that's harmful, think about the investment, right? Think about the output, the generational output. Think about that impact on economic and social development. I mean, the conflict in Ethiopia is not just hurting Ethiopian and Eritrean community, it's hurting Africa, it's hurting the continent. And ways that we can help empower countries to be able to take advantage of the resources there and to share in those resources. I mean, I think, there is a question of right and ownership. I think the better question is, how do we collectively be able to take advantage of these resources to increase our output as a region. That's when I think really coming together and having, I mean, we have this in Northern America, we have the NAFTA, trade agreement. I mean, we come together, Canada, Mexico, and the US to really talk about us as a Northern American region and what we can do to help work together. I think it should be the same way. I think the idea, the perspective here could be, how do we work together to collectively increase our output as a region and ensure that we are, as neighboring countries and allies, helping each other in this shared pursuit. And therefore it becomes a collective ownership. It becomes a collective mission to progress forward.
The United States of America has many transboundary rivers. So what is American experience like in this regard, especially when it comes to, equitable and reasonable utilization of transboundary rivers?
It's a great question. And I think, it's right. If you think about the formation of our nations, the formation of our sovereign states, man created these boundaries, and they did not create them along lines along these rivers and along these resources, right? They created them in a way that would create opportunity for us to share in those resources. So I think with America, the United States, I mean, we've had we've had a history, and as a newer nation, the US, we've had to adapt and learn ways that we can take advantage of these resources along with our neighboring allies. And I think that's when international cooperation, diplomacy, coming to the table, being able to act sovereignly, right? I think it goes back to your question of, should the EU be intervening, and what is the EU's place in mediating these discussions or in participating in these discussions? I think the US, we've been a sovereign state that has been able to come to the table and have these discussions, and we've been able to come out of those and create a system that works. I mean, I believe that the same can be applied to the discussions happening along the Nile. When you bring sovereign states to the table and create a shared conversation around shared goals, then it becomes much more equitable. I think there's a lot to be learned. Maybe not everything will work, but I think there's a lot to be learned from the US. And that comes also, as we talked about before, to deepening that relationship between the US and Ethiopia, to creating and further strengthening the economic and international cooperation ties that we have relied on for so long, in a way to help increase, I think, the discussions that are happening. And look, I look forward. I think that, we're at a moment right now of great discussion. I have tremendous belief in the Ethiopian government. I believe that we will find a solution. I think we'll find an agreement that all parties, can agree to. And I think in time, we will all see how much this will create a tremendous amount of potential in the region and for Ethiopia. And really, there's severe drought and there's severe, conflict right now. And this can really help solve a lot of it. And I'm very much looking forward to seeing that impact on the Ethiopian economy and for the Ethiopian people.
Yeah, well, that's a good point, Victoria. Thank you so much for those wonderful ideas, and I wish you success on whatever you are doing. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.
Well, dear viewers, with that, we come to the end of today's program. Thank you also for being with us.